Maybe in the future, historians will view this patch of eastern Queens, beside the Grand Central Parkway, where Donald Trump and Andrew Cuomo were both born, as significant for the course of U.S. politics as they do the area of the Virginia Piedmont, beside the Blue Ridge Mountains, where Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were both born. Let's hope not. It was this question that led me to wheel my bike out of my building's basement in Jackson Heights and ride about 9 miles southeast to see where these guys came from. The question first jumped at me from the depths of COVID time.
Hi.
When Trump and Cuomo were everywhere on our screens. Most of the same people who viewed Cuomo as an attractive, comforting, informed, take-charge leader viewed Trump as a repugnant, upsetting, ignorant strongman. I saw them both as megalomaniacs, insecure bullies, hyper-entitled brats, remarkably comparable narcissists, political first cousins, no more than once removed. Their adjacent boyhoods and adjacent neighborhoods lived in adjacent years, suggested a historical path across which to contemplate their adjacent politics today. This is how I bike from my neighborhood, Jackson Heights, defined by public transportation, by the subway, to their neighborhoods, Jamaica Estates and Holliswood, defined by private transportation, by cars, and closer to Nassau County than to any of the city's 4 other boroughs. New histories demand really are derived from new cartographies, and that remapping must consider times as well as places, the present as well as the past, not simply to be relevant and provocative, but credible and self-aware. The chaotic character of Queens's quasi-urban planning manifests as haphazard suburban intrusions, like the ossified flying saucer up ahead on the left, today's Queens Place Mall, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. It landed on Queens Boulevard at the height of the space age in 1965. It's impossible to cross Queens without crossing Robert Moses, who bandaged the borough with his suburban-bound highways. It's strangely illuminating to so habitually view what Moses so extensively built for cars from the angles and at the pace afforded by my bike. Those angles and that pace allowed me to see Moses as a central place between Donald and Andrew across time through Queens. I documented my Jamaica Estates Holliswood bike rides at 2 distinct moments, exactly 4 years apart in Donald Trump's and Andrew Cuomo's weirdly parallel political careers. I first filmed my cycling in the spring of 2021 between Trump's and Cuomo's seeming political self-destructions. That was in the aftermath of Trump's traumatic January departure from the presidency, following 2 impeachments and his provocation of a deadly insurrection in response to his defeat by Biden, and in the run-up to Andrew Cuomo's August resignation as governor, following multiple accusations of sexual harassment and charges of incompetence and corruption over his handling of the COVID crisis, which had initially boosted his prestige and bloated his ego, stoking his own presidential aspirations. When I returned to record my rides in the spring of 2025, Trump had improbably returned as president, hell-bent on revenge, and Cuomo had launched his own attempt at political resurrection by running for mayor of New York City. Whether sunken like the Grand Central or elevated like the Van Wyck, Robert Moses's Queens highways defined the semi-suburban, car-centric culture the Donalds and Andrews adjacent boyhoods shared. The Grand Central, built in the 30s, was particularly central. It cuts directly through Jamaica Estates and is Holliswood's northern border. Both Andrew and Donald were privately schooled nearby their homes in Queens. Andrew went to Archbishop Malloy for high school in Briarwood, nestled next to Moses's Van Wyck and just off of his Grand Central, one neighborhood over from Jamaica Estates and two from Holliswood. Donald went to day school in Forest Hills until his family shipped him up the Hudson to board at the New York Military Academy. The Trumps and the Cuomos intertwine intergenerationally across boroughs, beginning in Queens in the 1930s. As Donald's dad Fred and his grandmother Elizabeth expanded their Queens real estate investments, Andrew's paternal grandparents, Andrea and Immaculata, bought a grocery store on 150th Street in South Jamaica, on the other side of Hillside Avenue from where both families lived. On his way to his Brooklyn office via Moses's highways, Fred Trump was known to stop in for coffee at the corner spot the Cuomos operated for 4 decades. The Cuomo's son Mario graduated from St. John's Law School, just across Moses's Grand Central, from where both families resided, before he joined a downtown Brooklyn firm well connected to the city's democratic machine and that counted Fred Trump as a client. When Mario's boy Andrew lured at his father's former firm in the 1980s, Fred's boy Donald dangled Manhattan business, hoping to purchase favor with the administration of Andrew's dad, Governor Mario Cuomo. But these interpersonal contacts are incidental to the political as well as terrestrial infrastructure that shaped the Trumps and the Cuomos' world. A world designed by Robert Moses, to whom both Fred and Mario personally paid homage, and whom both Donald and Andrew have explicitly admired. Moses's Grand Central paves a narrative road between the Trumps and the Cuomos, between Jamaica Estates and Holliswood, between now and then. Jamaica Estates and Holliswood's proximity to Nassau County is not simply geographical, but social. This is car country. Houses were built to garage automobiles. Streets were shaped and labeled to deter outsiders. The enclave's shared cuneiform layout and pretentious old-world street names indicate that suburban affiliation. The numbered street names and right angles of the surrounding blocks dissolve into meandering curves, labeled with Spanish and Italian locales, such as Santiago and Pompeii in Holliswood, and English places in Jamaica Estates, like Cambridge and Eton. Wareham, where Donald Trump's life began. The real estate development company Fred Trump owned and operated with his mother Elizabeth built most of the English Tudors on Wareham, including their own. This essay's research, like its contents, reverberates between present and past, between my biking through Trump and Cuomo land in Queens and my archive digging through Moses's papers in Manhattan. Those vibrations generate my mapping of Donald and Andrew's connections to one another, as well as to Moses, who hovers over the city like hysterical smog decades after his physical demise in 1981. E. Trump and Son began by building houses in Queens in the 1920s and 30s, and as the company's fortunes grew, Fred built a mansion for his family directly behind his Wareham Place house, around the block on Midland Parkway. Fred Trump's fortune was then not self-made. Not only were his ventures built on his partnership with his mother, their capital had been largely accumulated by Fred's late father, Friedrich, like Elizabeth, an immigrant to the United States from Germany. Fred's later expansion into Brooklyn apartment buildings depended on another father. Daddies beget daddies, and Robert Moses was Donald Trump's daddy's daddy. There would have been no Manhattan Donald without Fred Trump's Brooklyn Queens empire, and Fred well appreciated that he owed his interborough fortune to Moses, a fact that he lavishly expressed well after the power broker had lost his own empire. Fred Trump was a provincial vassal in Bob Moses's metropolitan kingdom. The outer borough developer owed lots to the mid-century city's master planner, but their connection was not simply personal or transactional, but structural and ideological. They shared a social point of view, as well as a political culture. Like Bob, Fred was a racist and a Republican, who nonetheless relied on business with the democratic machine that controlled city politics from beyond Manhattan. Moses's so-called public works had enabled Trump's private developments. The power brokers' arterial expressways and interborough bridges opened Brooklyn and Queens to the likes of Fred, who built for the same white car-driving middle classes for whom Moses designed his outer-borough parks and beaches. Donald and Andrew both began college, living at home in Queens, commuting by car over Moses's roads and bridges to attend Fordham University in the Bronx. Their enrollment at Fordham reflects the Trumps and Cuomo's social convergence with each other, as well as with Moses. For the private Jesuit school was the power broker's most favored institution of higher learning, one with which he forged a deep alliance that benefited Fordham and superseded the public officials' relationship to the city's public colleges, as well as Columbia, where he had done his own doctorate in political science, but viewed as politically circumspect. As Donald started Fordham in 1964, Moses made an indelible impression on the 18-year-old scion. Invited by Moses, Donald stood beside Fred at the Brooklyn inauguration of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge that November, where he observed Moses, the project's developer, for that is what Moses mainly was, a public sector developer, occupied center stage, while the brilliant designer of the engineering marvel, Othmar Amon, was ignored. A few months earlier, at the New York World's Fair, Donald had seen Moses's mammoth monument to his own rule, his Unisphere, in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, a short drive from the Trump mansion in Jamaica Estates. Donald notably has twice plagiarized Moses's cenotaph, once for one of his now long bankrupt Atlantic City casinos, and for his still-standing minisphere in Columbus Circle. These ersatz Unispheres are nonetheless authentic architectural citations to Donald's rarely self-acknowledged Queen's origins, as well as to his barely sublimated Moses fixation. Not only did Donald and Andrew begin college close to home, but both went from college to work at home for their dads. Donald rebranded himself an Ivy Leaguer by transferring from Fordham in the Bronx to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia, precursor to the Queen's reared status chasers, later rebranding himself a Manhattanite. But from college, Donald came home to work for Fred in Brooklyn, managing his dad's outer-borough apartment buildings from the Trump Organization's office just off Moses's Belt Parkway on Avenue Z in Coney Island. Before he even graduated Fordham, Andrew managed his dad's 1977 mayoral campaign, resulting in Mario's double loss to Ed Koch, first in the Democratic primary and then, when Mario stayed in the race on the Liberal line, in the general election in November. And Donald stood with Fred as the Trumps fought first the Lindsay administration's and then the Nixon administration's efforts to integrate the Trumps' outer-borough apartment buildings, to undo the synergy between theirs and Moses's racist housing practices. The 1975 federal settlement compelling the Trumps to rent to blacks signaled the 29-year-old Donald's future as a public advocate for white power, as he reinvented himself, backed by Fred's outer-borough fortune, as a Manhattan magnate in the late 70s, who, in the late 80s, provoked a lynch mob mentality toward the wrongfully convicted so-called Central Park Five, before the black youths were ultimately exonerated, only years later. Donald and Andrew both project decidedly out-of-borough-inflected tough guy personas. Distinct from their smoother dads, the sons act like they have something to prove, for they are a couple of daddy's boys. It's more than unlikely that we would have heard of either Donald or Andrew without the careers of Fred and Mario, and they behave like they know it. We're approaching 188th Street, the singular numbered street to cross Jamaica Estates and Holliswood, unimpeded, a straight line. It's also the border between the two semi-suburbs. Jamaica Estates, where Donald's grandmother and parents moved when they began to make it, and Holliswood, where Andrew's grandparents and parents moved when they began to make it. 11432 into 11423, less a sequential regression than an evocative transposition, a historical provocation between adjacent neighborhoods and adjacent politicians. Unlike Donald's mom, Mary, who was born in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, or Donald's Bavarian-born paternal grandparents, Andrew's mother and father, Matilda and Mario, like his paternal grandfather Andrea, were New York City-born. When Andrew was born, his parents lived in his paternal grandparents' house, just across 188th Street from Jamaica Estates. Adjacency is not equality. When Andrew and Donald were boys, the Cuomos were not considered the right type of white to be welcome in the Trump's Jamaica Estates, but they could settle across 188th Street, here in Holliswood. As had Donald in Jamaica Estates, Andrew would move to a new house in Holliswood, constructed for his family, about a half-mile east from here. Like Fred Trump, Mario Cuomo in the early 70s found himself embroiled by the contested legacy of Moses's racist housing regime. In 1972, the ultra-liberal Lindsay administration enlisted the ultra-moderate Cuomo to mediate the dispute that arose when middle and upper-middle-class white residents of semi-suburban Forest Hills resisted Mayor Lindsay's plan to build a large-scale, low-income housing project that would diversify Forest Hills, racially as well as economically. Cuomo's negotiated result allowed him to position himself as a liberal pragmatist, while in essence preserving Moses's segregationist housing regime, which Lindsay's policies had attempted to overturn. Instead of low-income rentals that privileged people of color, the eventually scaled-back development featured cooperatively owned middle-income units that, in fact, did not challenge the white order. Consequently, in the early 70s, as the Trump's resistance to integration failed, Mario Cuomo's work in Forest Hills resulted in blacks remaining on the outside. Urban real estate became semi-suburban Andrew's thing. When as governor, Mario pried open a post for his son in the Clinton administration. It was in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which Andrew eventually ran. Like many New York politicos, Andrew socialized with the politically promiscuous Donald, the city's most controversial developer since Moses. And when Andrew succeeded his father in electoral politics, New York real estate developers and landlords and their big labor construction partners have been and remain his principal funders, and he the compliant instrument. Geography and history uncannily resonate between Old World and New. Holliswood street names index Italian-American heritage. Palermo Street gives way to Salerno Avenue, coincidentally named for the Campagna town from near where the Cuomos had immigrated. As with Donald's Unisphere crush, Andrew's Queens boyhood endures. When asked during a mayoral debate to name his favorite city park, Cuomo reached back to Cunningham, just across Moses's Grand Central Parkway from Holliswood. Gunton Avenue, named for Holliswood's late 19th century developer, marks this area's pre-New York City history, before the western third of Queens County became a borough in 1898, and the rest of Queens became Nassau County, which begins about 3 miles east from here. This gray ride took place during a gray time. In March 2021, the long shadow cast by George Floyd's Minneapolis lynching in May 2020 still shaded Queens as it did so much of the world. The Black Lives Matter sign on the lower right documents that time, a message I saw only when I reviewed this footage 4 years later. It's an amusing serendipity that a street named for Cleo, the Greek muse of history, intersects our ride between present and past. The Trumps of Jamaica Estates were successors to the likes of Dunton, the forgotten developer of Holliswood, when Mario Cuomo built his house in the early 60s. Real estate and politics are yoked in New York, like most everywhere, a fact that Robert Moses personified, magnified, in the era in which both the Trumps and Cuomos rose to power. Both boys learned from Dad. Donald learned from working for Fred that politics, working the public sector, was the key to making real estate money. Andrew learned from working for Mario how to profess a commitment to progress, albeit in a less believable and far less melodious voice than Mario's, while working diligently to preserve the status quo. Like Donald, Andrew has publicly revered Moses. As governor, Andrew praised Moses as an exemplar of executive authority. Andrew's own Machiavellian machinations to evade legislative oversight, to sideline all perceived rivals, especially progressives and even liberals, in his own Democratic Party, as well as his ostentatious personalismo, particularly performed at the opening of major infrastructure projects, whether or not conceived by him, convincingly confirms the artless veracity of his effusive praise of Moses as a man who could get things done, and the kinds of things, the car things, that the self-described car guy from Holliswood values. The power broker would be undoubtedly tickled by Andrew's vindicating recognition, notably from the son of the fledgling politician whom Moses had identified as a late-life ally. Daddies beget daddies. A half-decade after Mario Cuomo had preserved Moses's racist public housing scheme in Forest Hills, and a couple of years before Fred Trump reached back to reminisce with Bob, the power broker reached forward to cultivate Mario, whom he viewed as a kindred politico, a comer, potential protege, a possible asset in Moses's perpetual quixotic maneuvering to restore his own influence. Pushing 90 in 1977, Moses saw an opportunity for himself in consoling Cuomo, who had just lost his first bid for electoral office, beaten for mayor by Ed Koch, whom Moses hated. Perhaps Moses identified with Cuomo, who was not only 45, the same crossroads age Moses had been when he had lost his first, and in his case only run for public office as the Republican candidate for New York governor in 1934, but also held the same appointed office, Secretary of State, for Governor Hugh Carey that Moses had held a half-century earlier, when he began his political ascent under Democratic Governor Al Smith. The cultivation was mutual. Addressing Moses as commissioner, a title the power broker cherished but no longer held, was the ultimate flattery. Privately stroking the fallen emperor's ego was also good strategy. For Mario Cuomo recognized that the many out-of-borough, suburban, and upstate whites, especially moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats, who pined for Robert Moses were potential Cuomo supporters for his next political moves, which turned out to be successful campaigns for lieutenant governor in 1978 and for governor in 1982. Moses would have appreciated the bullying tactics as well as anti-democratic proclivities of Fred's and Mario's boys, who also, like Moses, expressed power through building.
You enjoyed working with Spain because you could get decisions, you could get things done.
Yes,
a lot of people criticized you for that.
I don't care whether they do or not. I say that dictators and tough executives, they're satisfactory people to deal with because they do make a decision and it sticks. Why should there be any apologies for that?
Pulling away from Cuomo's house, we turn away from Jamaica Estates and begin a slalom-like descent from Holliswood down towards Hillside Avenue. We are also moving away from the contrasts between Holliswood and Jamaica Estates, towards the differences between both of those semi-suburban enclaves and the city that lies below the hill they co-occupy. Editing this footage, I see things more widely than I did as I filmed them from my bike. Altitude dictates sociology, which manifests architecturally. The housing here is less fancy. Generic boxy apartment complexes mixed with modest houses, defensively fenced haphazardly, with no apparent neighborhood design. This is a social middle zone, a foothill colony of Cossacks, situated as a buffer between the uphill gentry in the grander and more elegantly landscaped homes, and the downhill hoi polloi along and across Hillside Avenue. Foothill Avenue indexes this social elevation's borderland. Its racialized history across Hillside Avenue is Holliswood's Black Other, Hollis. When Andrew was a boy, African-American middle-class homeowners were not welcome in Holliswood, but they settled in Hollis, much like and unlike Italian-Americans who could live on top of the whites-only hill in Holliswood, were unwelcome in Jamaica Estates. A small town-style war memorial, topped by the Stars and Stripes, marks Holliswood's Hillside Avenue gateway. But before we can get up the hill, we encounter a Welcome to Holliswood sign, which seems out of place in New York City, more a piece of Nassau County than the rest of Queens. Situated at a turnaround along this entryway at 193rd Street, the sign says welcome, but the message it radiates is keep out. If you do not live here, if you're not visiting someone you know here, if you do not have a place to park, turn back. As we turn back, we can view Hollis's official entrance. Its gates situated directly across Hillside Avenue from Holliswood's here, and within which its streets are laid out in numbered blocks, in contrast to uphill Holliswood's more suburbanly genteel shapes and names. Hillside Avenue is the Grand Central Parkway's other, paralleling Moses' Highway below the hill, shared by Jamaica Estates and Holliswood above. If the Grand Central ropes those semi-suburbs east into Nassau County, principally via private transportation, cars, Hillside Avenue connects Greater Jamaica west with the rest of New York City via public transportation, buses, but especially the subway, beginning where the F train begins and ends at 179th Street, below and beyond where the Trumps and Cuomos lived. The F line's Queens terminus marks less a way into the city, defined colonially as Manhattan, than where the city, defined globally by immigration and connected socially by public transportation, actually begins. Here we are at Hillside Avenue and Midland Parkway, downhill from the Trump Mansion, less than half a mile above, but a world away. The car guy's semi-suburban sensibilities traveled across place and time. Andrew traveled from his semi-suburban boyhood in Holliswood to a full-fledged suburb in Westchester. Before he retreated to a gated compound at Mar-a-Lago, Donald imposed his Jamaica Estates values on Midtown Manhattan, where, like Moses, he viewed cars as the main means of urban transportation. The buildings Trump branded, beginning with his Fifth Avenue Tower, operate as vertical subdivisions, elite enclaves that, like Jamaica Estates, ignore the surrounding city, reject its diversity. They are fortresses against the street, and their commercial spaces mime the anodyne design of suburban malls. Donald and Andrew have each evinced pathological insecurities in their brutish domestic relations, personal as well as political. Public revelations about their private aggressions towards women, and their urban police interventions to demonstrate their dominance over rival politicians. As governor, Andrew ordered state troopers to patrol New York City in order to show his rival, Mayor Bill de Blasio, that he was the boss. And as president, Donald has ordered gratuitous military interventions in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., because the would-be king could. As we bike along the F train's Hillside Avenue stops, the streets become busier, more citified, more cosmopolitan, manifesting above ground. The metropolis, the subway socially irrigates from below. Approaching our ride's end compels contemplation of where Donald and Andrew each are in their respective races with their daddies. Each son seems driven by an insatiable need to best their dad, but they've evinced different strategies. Donald has attempted to erase Fred from the Trump brand, while Andrew ostentatiously pays homage to Mario, but in ways that demonstrate his own supremacy. Donald succeeded less as a real estate developer than at playing one on TV. His celebrity birthed his political career, and by becoming President of the United States, Donald finally trumped Fred who only presided over the Trump Organization, which depended on politicos like Moses, a class that Donald now viciously rules. Politics saved a fortune that Fred built, but Donald had all but squandered. Andrew chased his father's legacy to Albany. He demonstrated that ambition with a Trump-like rebranding. As governor, in 2017, Andrew controversially renamed the Tappan Zee Bridge, a Moses-era project spanning suburbias across the Hudson River, for his late dad, Mario, the former governor, before Andrew's own governorship collapsed in its third term, the one Mario completed but Andrew resigned. Pursuing the lesser office of New York's mayor, the one Mario failed to win, seems driven by a desire for patriarchal as well as political vindication. Up ahead, here in Jamaica, Hillside Avenue eventually crosses Queens Boulevard, at the other end of that formidable road which we rode toward Trump and Cuomo's past. Like history itself, whether we view Queens Boulevard's southeastern terminus as its end or its beginning is relative, determined by the story being told, which always awaits revision. History depends on detours, forging new routes, rather than simply repaving what's been mapped before. One detour ends, and another begins. Our ride has contemplated the past, but it moves through the present. See the woman on the scooter crossing in front of us? It's impossible to imagine her rolling through Holliswood toward Jamaica Estates, donning a hijab when either Andrew or Donald were boys. It's notable that Trump has discriminated against Muslims, and that during a mayoral debate, Cuomo could not name one mosque he has visited. The place is no more static than time. It changes. History is dynamic, unstable, contingent. It depends on new maps between present and past.